Thor, and today we are going to be talking about the solar eclipse that's about to happen in the sign of Libra on October 25th. So make sure you mark your calendars for that day. And I feel like this solar eclipse is so important because 2 days prior to that, Saturn's going to be going direct in the sign of Capricorn. And then we're going to have the lunar eclipse on November 8th. And then we're going to have our Mars going retrograde on October 30th. So there's a lot of energy that's happening right now. And I'm going to show you in the chart, in the USA chart and President Biden's chart, they're both Scorpio ascendant. It's happening in the 12th house of Libra in both of those charts. So I do feel like this is going to have a negative impact when we really look at things here. For those of you guys that are new to my channel, first of all, I'd like to welcome you guys. And also make sure you guys like and subscribe, hit the bell. My goal is 10,000 subscribers. And this is Vedic astrology. If you guys are new to this, it's different than Western astrology. So your sign may be different using this system. And also, if you guys are interested in your own personal private reading, you can find out, details are down below, and it's 40% off right now. So go ahead and check that out. So the eclipse season is here, and I feel like this is going to be a very catalytic time. And specifically, we're going to talk about this in a moment when I show you the chart, but I do feel like we're going to see some negative things happening in the financial markets coming up very soon in the next couple months. Maybe they'll wait till after the midterms. I also see some changes with that, and we're going to talk about that specifically. Let me show you the USA chart. So here's the USA chart. The US is actually a Scorpio ascendant, just like I said with Joe Biden. He's a Scorpio ascendant as well. So these two charts are both very relevant when we're looking at what's happening with the eclipses. So the solar eclipse is going to be happening right here in the 12th house of Libra, okay? And you'll notice there's no planets there in the USA chart, but there's planets there in Joe Biden's chart, and there's even planets in his 6th house of Aries. So when we're looking at an eclipse, and this will even affect you guys on a personal level, you also want to check the opposite house, 7 houses from itself, because when we're dealing with eclipses, we're really dealing with an eclipse axis. So if the eclipse is happening in the 12th house for a Scorpio ascendant, it's also going to be affecting the 6th house of Aries. Okay, so you want to check both of those houses. The energy is going to be going across that axis. And right now for Scorpio ascendant, it's going to be a difficult time because it's on that 12-6 axis. And remember, 12 and 6 are both considered malefic houses because they're associated with losses and conflict and war and things like that. So let's go back to the slideshow here. It's going to be in the nakshatra Swati. And it's interesting, Swati represents scattering like the wind. So we could be seeing a lot of things dissolve or things falling apart during this time. What I want you to be aware of is when we're talking about eclipses, they're more powerful than your monthly full moon and new moon cycles. And also these eclipses can be major catalyst events in our lives. So when there's an eclipse, you usually see big changes for up to the next 3 to 6 months afterwards. So that's why they're so powerful. Even if you're going through a specific Mahadasha or Bhukti, the eclipses are always going to affect how your karma is really unfolding throughout all of this. So like I said earlier, in the USA chart, it's happening in the 12th house of Libra. And also it's the same with President Biden. And the 12th house, I've explained this in some of my other videos, but it's associated with losses, endings, resignations, drains of energy, loss of vitality, spirituality. And since we're dealing more with a collective influence, you know, I wouldn't necessarily say it's going to make the US more spiritual, but, you know, it could lead to a lot of people waking up through negative circumstances. And that's what the 12th house really represents. The 12th house is when you lose things, but it's for your spiritual benefit. So for example, let's say you lose a job, but then you go on a pilgrimage or you go on a spiritual retreat. Well, that's how the 12th house benefits you. It takes away something that might have been a blockage in your path. And in some ways, maybe this eclipse is going to be taking away something that's a blockage in the USA chart. Okay, so on a collective level, when we're talking about karma, not only do we have world karma, but we have karma as nations and we have karma as individuals. So there's all these different interplays of karma and experience that's happening. Let me take us back to the slideshow here. And so, like I said, this is going to affect the 6th house of Aries, the opposite sign, which is conflict, okay? And that's where the lunar eclipse is going to be happening. That's where the lunar eclipse is going to be happening November 8th, and I'm going to make a special video about that. That's going to be in the sign of Aries. And again, if we look at the USA chart and President Biden's chart, it's going to be in the 6th house. And the 6th house always represents things like conflict, social unrest, problems, things like that. So this is a very tumultuous period for the USA. And of course, this is going to be affecting the whole world, especially when you think of a lot of the world runs on dollars because it's used as a reserve currency for most of the world. So this is affecting the worldwide, just like when we saw the 2008 economic crisis. You know, we saw it starting with the mortgage-backed securities in the USA, but then it ended up affecting the whole world on that level. So let's go back. There's major influence, and I talked about that in the beginning of this, was when we're looking at this eclipse, it's not happening in a vacuum. So there's all these types of other influences happening. Remember, we got Saturn going direct, it's changing signs. And whenever Saturn changes directions, it's not changing signs. When it changes directions, that shows a huge energy shift. Anytime you see Saturn either change directions or change signs, that's going to represent a massive shift of energy and a massive release of karma. So I want you all to be aware of that in your charts. We're going to be finally resolving some things in our lives that we've been facing for the last 3 years. So I want you to think of not only on a collective level, what have we been facing, but on an individual level, they're going to finally be fixed or rectified between now and January 17th when Saturn changes signs. And the next thing we're going to talk about, I'm going to make a special video about this because this is a big deal. And I've been seeing other astrologers. We're thinking there's going to be some escalations in the war front there, especially with Ukraine. With this Mars retrograde that's happening October 30th, which is going to be basically right on the USA natal Mars. And I'll show you guys that when we do the video on Mars retrograde, but that's affecting it too. And then we have the lunar eclipse November 8th. What I wanted to make a note to all of you is there's this movement of all these cruel planets. So Mars and Saturn both represent, the cruel aspects of life, cruel karma. So these are both moving. Saturn's going direct and then Mars is going retrograde, and it's like, okay, we're going to have some heavy karma that we're all facing as a collective at the moment. So this is going to be a tough time when we're looking at it. And let me take you back to the chart because I wanted to show you some of the other things that are going on just as a refresh. As you guys know, Saturn is currently in Capricorn, and that's going to be moving direct October 23rd. 25th, we're going to have the eclipse right here in the USA chart. Okay. And then we're going to have Mars going retrograde. It's going to start going retrograde here. And it's going to go retrograde back in the Taurus. That's October 30th. And then we're going to have the other eclipse, the lunar eclipse in the sign of Aries. And here's the karmic axis here. So you see all these movements of the planets. Major karmic changes are happening. Okay. Now, I believe that these changes are happening, even though it might seem scary on the surface. I really feel like what it represents is this whole Mars-Saturn theme. You notice both of these these planets are going to be going opposite directions. Well, what does Mars represent? Mars represents something new. It represents innovation, growth. That's why I've made so many videos on like cryptocurrencies, right? Because we're looking forward to the future. Well, the economy, everything's going through this whole shift. There's a lot of things in the economy that are going to be obsolete in 10 or 20 years. We know that there's going to be robots. We know there's going to be AI. There's going to be a lot of things obsolete. Well, what are we going to do with everyone? How are we going to have enough jobs for everyone? This is something that this economic crisis is going to be raising. It's a question that we're all going to have to collectively come to an answer to. What's going to be the new definition of work? What's going to be the new definition of how people receive or earn money? This is all going to be looked at. And that's why we're going through this whole fourth turning type of crisis at the moment. And that's what looks like it's going to be happening in the next couple months. So any of you guys that are heavily leveraged in Wall Street or the stock market, I am giving a warning here with some of the predictions. The 12th house, and this is where the solar eclipse is happening, it represents losses and endings. And sometimes those endings aren't, they're not fun. Even though it's good for us on a spiritual level, it's not fun to lose your job. It's not fun to do any of that stuff. So 12th house, I believe Wall Street's going to be taking some losses. Also, the 12th house with the solar eclipse, I do see more layoffs and cost cutting within corporations and government institutions, especially in the US, because we're looking at the US chart. On a global level, it's going to be happening in the 7th house. So that's going to be a little bit different. It's going to be about fairness and justice. And we can talk about that. But I think there's actually going to be a loss of agreement because K2's there in the sign of Libra. But in the US chart, definitely there's going to be some problems. People are going to be getting laid off. Also, this could represent problems overseas. Since we're looking at this through the US perspective, the 12th house represents foreign countries. Even though it's a small world and many of my clients are not American, I see everybody as we're all collective humanity. But from the US chart, this could be issues overseas. And well, we see there's escalations happening. So either in Ukraine, or we could see issues happening with Taiwan and China. Those are both very much on the table. And in President Biden's chart, the 12th house, it could represent losses in losing seats in the House of Representatives or Senate during the midterms. So I do feel like there's going to be a political shift during this time, especially when I look at President Biden's chart. The 12th house represents losses. I mean, there's no way around that. It's losses. So I do think there's going to be, at least if there's not a shift in power during the midterms, at least there's going to be losses in terms of losing seats. There's not going to be as much influence in the House or the Senate. And that's definitely going to be changing the political dynamic. So we could say that this is political losses. So I see financial political losses. And of course, with this Mars going retrograde, there is the prospect of a war escalation. I know right now what I'm telling everybody, and I had a few people tell me in my comments a few weeks ago, you're being very negative, and they even said they unsubscribed. But I want you to know, I'm trying to give you guys, the tough truth. Sometimes the truth is not comfortable. And the reason why we must face the truth, and this is what Vedic astrology, and really when you start awakening, facing the truth and facing your own personal demons, but also the demons in the collective, it's a path of awakening. Okay, you don't awaken by covering your eyes. You don't awaken by putting your fingers in your ears. You awaken by seeing the truth. And sometimes the truth is not fun, either in your personal life, your personal experience, or even on a collective level. And there's things that we have to deal with to make this planet a better planet, to make this planet the age of Aquarius, which we all want to see it go to. Well, we're going to have to face the truth of things. We can't pretend they're not. We can't pretend everything's great when it's not. There's a lot of inequality. There's a lot of situations in the world that need to be fixed. So thank you guys for watching this video. I will be doing, I believe I will be doing another video on how the eclipses are going to be affecting all of the 12 signs as well, for you guys that are interested in your individual horoscopes. Let me take a look at the chat and see if there's any questions from the live stream. Reverse fulfillment says a lot of crime would go away with some universal basic income. Well, I would say the universal basic income, I feel like it's going to come whether or not people like it or not. The reason why I bring this up, and I'm a little bit of a futurist on this, you know, people, the old definition used to be, and this is from older generations, but it used to be you work hard, you get a job, and you earn your money, and you live that way through retirement, okay? And you get whatever job you can, you know, whether it be at a factory, whether you have a special skill, whether you become a doctor or an attorney. Well, in the future, and we already know this, things, that definition of, you know, is there going to be a need for just people to work? And I'm talking about, is there going to be just this absolute imperative that everyone needs to work when there's robots and AI doing a lot of the mundane work in this future world that we're envisioning? Well, no, there's not going to be a need for everybody to work. Well, how do we shift the global consciousness out of that? I mean, we're talking about the future. What I'm foreseeing is like a Star Trek civilization. There's not going to be a need as much for manual labor and things like that. Sure, there'll be jobs for people to use their creativity or what they want to make for themselves. But this is going to be a time of tumultuous. It's going to be a time of old ideas, the old ideas of people need to work versus what is, and this is really coming from an awakening perspective, what is the purpose of being a human being? Is it just to work? Or is there a greater purpose for humanity than just working for something like money and trying to make a living? So that's what we're really going to be coming up with philosophically and morally. We're going to have that discussion. What is the purpose? If we can have robots and we can have AI do everything, all of the most mundane tasks, what is the purpose for humanity? Well, the great teachers, the yogis, Lord Buddha, they said our greatest purpose is to spiritually evolve and become enlightened and get out of this samsara and become, you know, lose the ego and experience bodhicitta and experience compassion for all loving beings. So we have this amazing potential to evolve spiritually. Are we going to realize that? Or are we still going to be stuck in the 3D world of mundane activities, of just of money and food and basic survival concerns, which is the lower 3 chakras? So these are questions we're going to have to explore, especially during the next 20 years with this Pluto transit that's happening through Capricorn. So thank you guys so much for being here. I appreciate this. Oh, one more question. Astrology related question. If you don't know your exact time of birth, is astrology useless? It seems small changes in birth time shifts dasas drastically. So reverse fulfillment asked the question. You do, for Vedic astrology, it is important that you know your birth time in a reasonable time. The reason being, in Vedic astrology, your lagna or your ascendant will change every 2 hours. So if we were just like choosing a random time, think about it. Every 2 hours, the lagna changes. That means you could be any of the 12 signs. Your mahadashas and your bhuktis, since they're going to be changing drastically. So it is really important to make sure you get a good, reasonable birth time within a few minutes, at least within 5 or 10 minutes. And when I got mine originally 15 years ago, I had to look on my birth certificate. So it is important to get an accurate birth time. There are ways, and it takes a lot of work for this to rectify your chart by taking special events like marriage dates or divorce dates, or when you had children, or when you had career promotions. There are some things due, and it takes pretty labor extensive to be able to try to estimate your time of birth using rectification also. Well, thank you guys. Let me know what you guys think about the eclipses down below, and I look forward to seeing you guys soon. Bye-bye.